podcast. I'm your host, John Light, founder and CEO of Sabretooth Recruiting. And today, I'm very fortunate to be talking to Aditya Khandekar. And Aditya, I got to tell you, the work that you're doing right now I find very intriguing with corridor platforms. So thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Appreciate that.
So I'm sure most people haven't heard of corridor platforms unless they're maybe in banking or financial services, insurance, some space like that. Could you maybe share a little bit of background on you and the company, maybe a quick 90-second rundown as we get started?
Sure. My background spans technology, finance, a lot and very deep analytics, including playing chief analytics officer roles at fintechs and organizations like Fiserv, which is a large fintech, and then making my way into more governance, compliance, and regulations around AI. So as you know, responsible AI has become a big thing right now, right? And responsible AI for AI, traditional AI, and Gen AI, and blended systems. So what Corridor does, kind of segue to that, is really we are a decision management platform for both AI and Gen AI. We launched an offering called Gen Guard X on the Gen AI side, and then we have our core platform. And both of them basically enable institutions on a decision rail to bring in and build their decisions, do extensive experimentation, go through all of the governance and compliance that you need to do, and get decisions into production. And what are these decisions? Decisions are of the kind underwriting a loan or monitoring a credit quality of an existing credit portfolio, or collections, or cross-sells. Each one of these decisions, whether you're a bank, an insurance, or a healthcare, is heavily regulated, and it needs both internal guardrails as well as being able to show to auditors that you have sufficient guardrails and systems in-house to manage this in a responsible way, or responsible AI. And fundamentally, we enable that.
You know, I have a little bit of experience in my career working around banking and financial services fairly directly, and compliance and regulation, huge issues.
It is.
I'm curious to know, when you look at your platform and when you go talk to a potential client, you know, kind of where does Corridor hang its hat relative to what's the biggest problem that you all solve for your customers?
The big problem we find is organizations have invested heavily in front-end automation of digitization. So today you can apply it through Rocket Mortgage. You can apply for your loan. Brilliant, right? And at the back end, they've invested heavily into data lakes and systems which collect all of this data. Where they struggle is in the middle layer. Having a set of decisioning tools, they tend to have mostly fragmented tools that are somehow stitched together. And that does not cut it. I might have best-in-class front-end systems where you can apply seamlessly, but if an organization is taking 3 days to come back to you with the decision, if they haven't transformed their decisioning layer, but they have transformed their front layer, well, you're half done. And so that doesn't really help in that overall experience. And especially with everybody moving to digital, this is becoming very critical. So we tend to compete against internal systems where they are still relatively early stage and kind of duct taped together, and we try to really upgrade or leapfrog that decisioning capability to digital age.
You know, it's interesting to me because I've spent, I don't know how much time in my life, I'm sure you have too, accumulating knowledge and experiences, and it seems like the more life experience we get and the more knowledge we get, well, number one, we end up feeling like we know a lot less than we think we know. But number two, I think we come to a conclusion that knowledge and wisdom when it comes to decision making aren't necessarily the same thing. And to me, if I had the ability to see the outcome or end result of a decision, you know, from front to back before I actually have to make the decision in reality, like say I'm making it in the sandbox or however you want to look at it, that's a very powerful potential tool to tell me where the holes in the road are, or how to keep it out of the ditches. And I can't but help but imagine that in the space you're playing in, it's regulated. There's tons of compliance work. People's lives depend on, their economic lives depend on the banking system and insurance and whatnot. That's got to be a competitive space for you guys as well.
It is. So how do we differentiate ourselves and what is in the benefit of the issuer, whether that's a bank or insurance or healthcare. What is in the benefit of the issuer is you hit a couple of important points directly there. One, transparency. Second, you need to own your decisioning. You can't rent this capability, right? So there are a set of vendors out there in a market where they run it in black box, they run it through the cloud, but that's not sufficient. That can give you an immediate jump in certain upgrade, and let's say an acquisition decision, it can give you an upgrade. But then if you don't build, let's just say for banking, you don't build core underwriting capability in-house, whether that's the decision for underwriting, it's the pricing, it's offer counter offers, and credit monitoring. If you don't build these capabilities in-house, long term you do not have a real differentiation, because when the vendor would switch off, switch off the proverbial switch on your cloud delivered solution, you have nothing in-house. That's not good. And fundamentally what we see is, when you think about the USP, large banks continue to scale up, continue to accelerate further on the decisioning hierarchy and sophistication. Mid markets are finding it hard to stay. And if the gap is too much, they will almost give up. And we don't want that. We want community banks. We want credit unions as much as we want the large tier ones, right? Because they all bring capabilities to the table holistically. And we want the ability for mid market to compete and effectively participate in a digital marketplace. And that's what institutions strive for. So we're trying to help close that gap with tools so that you don't need to have an army of specialists working, which the tier ones would have, army of specialists working in the mid market and having the same quality of service and member or customer experience. So that's the kind of capability that we're looking to bring to the table and are working with clients on today.
Well, I mean, it's exciting to me because if I have a choice, no offense out there to the big banks and the big guys out there competing, the tier ones, I like to work with a banker I can talk to personally. Same thing with a financial advisor, same thing with whoever we buy insurance from. You want somebody that you can have some back and forth with, you can ask questions, and I don't necessarily want to type it out and hope that some bot spits out the right regurgitation to me.
Great.
And so I think there's a critical space in the United States, globally too, you could say from country to country, but in the United States specifically, there's critical space where these medium banks and smaller banks and credit unions, other institutions, they need a competitive, I guess to say gap closer. I don't know, or bridge. I don't know how else you really express it, because you talk about the gap between kind of the haves and the have-nots when it comes to resources. B of A, Citi, JP, any of those big companies, they can throw tremendous amounts of resources at a problem. They're not limited the way that your community bank is. So when you look at what you're delivering to these folks, I think there's tremendous value and upside if you can close that gap. I guess my question is too, is when you go and you talk to these people, these potential clients who are small and medium sized, how much sophistication do they recognize or need to bring to the table to be able to effectively use this tool? Because they may not have the depth of compliance or the depth of analytics or planning that some of the bigger companies have. So how do you bridge that gap as well?
So I try to take a very practitioner's and a practical approach to this. So let's just work with an example. Let's say there is a $5 billion credit union or a community bank, right? That's a good median example. These institutions, firstly, need to bring all of their data together in a place where I can harness them at acquisition as well as at the customer/member management, right? So having that data coming in one place is kind of critical. The second piece of it, they'll have a good functioning core banking solution. They'll have a good functioning lending origination system. Super, that's great. So you've got the basic nuts and bolts together. But their decisioning is limited to simple strategy rules and using one of the bureau scores, right? So what they tend to get is more adverse select, which means those members or customers who wouldn't have been underwritten and gotten a loan from tier one would end up at these mid markets, and that creates long-term delinquencies and such, right? Delinquencies and charge-offs. So what you want to do there is first try and find a way to upgrade their core decisioning for most of their consumer or small business lending products, right? That's kind of the first check marker in the journey in the crawl, walk, run is that. The second piece is once you got that in place, then you say, all right, how now that I've upgraded your capabilities there, how can I drive better conversion? And this is a somewhat of a subtle point. How do you go from approvals to acceptances, right? So if there are 5 institutions, let's say you've applied online and there are 5 institutions, 2 tier 1s and 3 mid-market. Let's say all of them approve in 200 milliseconds, but then who closes the deal? Who has counter offers? Who has the best pricing? Who's able to kind of do that last mile optimization, which John you like, and then you go pick, let's say Capital One versus a mid market. So that enabling them for that optimization, which goes from risk approval of the loan to acceptances, that's the next phase that you want to get to. So you drive more funded loans through the door population, right? And once you get there, then what do I do with my customers and members post that? That's when you get into member marketing and member loss management areas, right? So kind of a crawl, walk, run, where overall you want to end up at optimizing and improving customer experiences as well as customer profitability. So on both sides of the equation, right? But you do it in phases, and that's kind of how we approach the problem, rather than try to do a big, bold, blue ocean transformation, which never really works.
What's interesting to me is I see with the technology doing, there's a potential for democratization of a lot of different things in our economy. And I'm a big believer that when you have an industry dominated by a handful of very large players, you need small and medium players to be in the marketplace toe to toe. And can I say it this way, to kind of keep them honest, to be competitive and give people alternatives, because just because it's the biggest bank in the country doesn't mean it's the best bank for what your purposes are. So if I'm understanding things correctly, not only is this tool give these smaller and medium-sized institutions the opportunity to get on a more level playing field for competitive sakes, for the sake of competition, I should say. But it also is going to allow their customers ultimately to have better choices than they would otherwise.
I agree. Let me give you a statistic. In the banking space, there were 14,000 institutions about 12, 13 years back. We're down to about 4.5, 5,000. And I think I'm speaking about the banking. So there's banking and credit unions. Let's just assume we are talking about the banking side.
Right.
We went from 14,000 to now like 4,000, somewhere in that range, right? A lot of mergers, consolidation, and bankruptcies. Obviously, the 2008 crisis, was a big hammer there. So that's kind of one, and that's a scary statistic. To your point, and this is just going back to business strategy, any market that is a monopoly or an oligopoly is not good. You have less choices.
Right.
And what does that mean? Inefficiency, higher prices for the services offered, and less essentially it's an unstable market situation to be in, right? And that's where federal regulators, FTC, gets involved quite heavily. So you do want a competitive space where these institutions can live and thrive for everybody as an equal. So there is, like I said, there's a place for the tier ones, and there's a place for community banks, there's a place for credit unions. You need that, so this 4,000 that we have today, we want them to survive and thrive. It's important for the well-being of the nation and its citizens. Okay.
Right.
So to me, that's the kind of the mission that we are really enabling at Corridor, is enabling them to thrive in cohort or in construct with the tier 1 institutions. So both sides can live and thrive and offer choices where as a citizen you have the ability to get certain services. You might get a Chase credit card, awesome, because of, for whatever reasons, of your travel and rewards program, but then your day-to-day banking can be with a credit union, and you want to have both of them. That you really want best of breed. And I think that's really the Goldilocks zone where we want to be at, where you're not on the extremes of too many institutions which are not profitable, and then too few where you don't have enough choices. So you want to be in the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, nothing wrong with Goldilocks, man. I'll tell you that. Let me ask you this, Aditya. If someone wants to learn more, either connect with you and learn more about Corridor platforms, or just learn more about the industry, what's the best way for folks to find you?
So I am Aditya, Aditya, at corridorplatforms.com. I'm also reachable through our website. We have a contact at corridorplatforms.com. The website is corridorplatforms.com. So I am, yeah, highly reachable. I'm the chief revenue officer of the firm, and I just want to say that especially for the mid market, we are passionate. We came with a lot of tier one expertise, and we have seen what best in class is. And what we have tried to do is take out the mystery in all of this, convert this transparently into a product paradigm, make that available so that to the what we spoke about earlier in the podcast, really enable technology to bridge that gap, right? So that tier twos, tier one and a halves can compete with tier ones, and all of them as an ecosystem thrive and survive, right? And that's our mission, that's our passion. So happy to help anybody who wants to know
Well,
more.
look, my opinion, I think it's a great mission. I think it's necessary, and I think healthy competition for the big players is good for everybody, them and us and everyone in between. So I admire what you're doing, Aditya. Thanks so much for joining us.